So we received a number of messages for us to react to the new Netflix film, The Strays. So I'm here alone. Nick is not in town. This movie was wild. It is not at all what I expected from the log line. So that was fun. I did like the movie, although there are a few things that didn't work for me. But let's get to it. So it's written and directed by Nathaniel Martello-White in his directorial debut. So that's impressive. So the story is broken up into 4 parts. Part 1, we meet a woman named Neve, and she is a biracial black woman with very fair skin, which I think is important to the story. And we see that she lives in this beautiful town with her white husband and her 2 children who are teenagers. They're rich, they live in a beautiful home. She drives a fancy car, and she's the head mistress of a fancy private school. And that school is also where her 2 children attend. So we see that Neve basically has a problem with blackness. She has visions of a black man in a restaurant she's dining in that upsets her. She thinks she sees a black man standing behind her car, which causes her to crash her car. There's a new hire at her job who happens to be black, and he's the janitor. She's upset by his presence. Then her husband tells her that he has hired a black woman to work in his office. That seems to bother her. Neve is also very particular about her hair, and she doesn't want her natural texture to show, which is obviously curly. So she wears wigs that have straight hair. So clearly there's something wrong with this lady. And she is throwing a gala, for her charity, so a fundraising event at her home. And we see the gala occur, and all of a sudden, 2 black people show up, and they are the man who she's been seeing, who's also the janitor, and the woman who's working for her husband. And Neve freaks out. You people don't belong here. You're not going to ruin my life. Okay, cut to part 2, and we see that 5 days earlier, these 2 people, the black people who crashed the gala, Carl and Dion, they arrive into town, and their intention was to ingratiate the life of Neve and her family, because we find out those are also her children who she had from a previous relationship. Okay, so we see Carl and Dion working to get jobs at the school and at Neve's husband's job. We see that they are both trying to befriend Neve's other children. They're half siblings, which they are successful. Part 3 is about Cheryl. And we learn that Cheryl has not seen these kids, Carl and Dion, for 16, 17 years. And she's trying to explain to her family, because at this point, it's the night after the gala and the confrontation. And she's trying to say that their dad was a bad man, and so she had to get away. And then she arranges to go see Carl and Dion at a diner. And of course, they're so are we going to be part of your life now? Dion is saying so can we move in with you? And she's well, let's slow down. We all need time to process what has happened. She gives them £20,000 and tells them, why don't you go back to London, get sorted, we can all get our minds right, and then from there, we can work on sort of rekindling our relationship. Okay, so the final part, part 4, is called Family Reunion, because Carl and Dion don't wait for an invite. They return to Neve's house and they break in. And then it starts to feel kind of like the movie Funny Games, where it's very tense. It's clear that they are choosing violence today. We also find out that it's Dion's birthday, and her brother Carl is being very aggressive about, we're all going to celebrate, let's order some food, but it's uneasy, violence will probably happen. And we see that Carl takes Neve's husband to the gym in the house, and he is forcing him to bench press weights, and he's putting a lot of weight on the barbell, which ultimately falls on the husband's chest and badly injures him. So while that's happening, and food has been ordered for delivery, the delivery driver shows up. Neve opens the door, and she tells the delivery driver, can you hold on? I need to get you money for a tip. So she goes upstairs, gets her purse. She walks to the front door, and before she gets to the door, she tells her children, I'm sorry about this. I'm sure, you'll work on forgiving me. She gets to the front door, and we see she's holding her jacket. So you know where this is going. She walks out the front door, and we see her or hear her leave on the motorcycle of the delivery driver. So the final shot of the film is her 4 children standing in the foyer like, damn, our mom left. And for Carl and Dion, they're like, our mom left us again. The end. Yeah, this story was not at all what I thought it would be. There is so much to talk about. I can see why some people don't like it. I think it's provocative. There are some things that didn't work for me, like I said, but I'll get to those. Well, let's just start. So the biggest thing I didn't like is the opening of the film is we see Neve, whose actual name is Cheryl. We see her like 16, 17 years prior at home, and she's on the phone with someone complaining about how like she doesn't have money, the bill collectors are calling, she doesn't know what to do, this is not the kind of life she deserves. And then we see her write a note and leave it on the refrigerator saying that she's just popping out to go to the hairdressers. And then we flash forward to her life as Neve, as this rich woman. I didn't like that. I wish the film would have just started with Neve living this fabulous life so that when these two people show up to the gala, as the audience, I'm not really suspecting who they might be. Because the other thing is, Neve is very, very fair-skinned. And her 2 children from the previous relationship are much darker. So it wouldn't have clicked to me that those were her kids immediately. So I think we lose a lot of tension knowing that the woman we're seeing, Neve, she had a life before all of this. I didn't really like that. I also didn't, if Neve has been with her husband for the entirety of her children's lives, like the new children who are teenagers, that's a long time. And they seem like they don't know each other very well. Like there's a point where she's trimming her husband's hair, which I thought was funny because it looks like she didn't do anything to it. But he's saying something like, oh, these like hidden skills you have. And it's like, well, I don't know how hidden they are if you've been together for over a decade. So that didn't quite work for me. But I think the biggest thing is the fact that I already knew that this woman, Neve, had a life that would make me question who she is today. I wanted to be surprised. I think that would have had way more impact when we meet Carl and Dion at the gala. Again, she's very preoccupied with blackness. We hear that her son Sebastian has like a Lil Wayne poster in his room that she has taken down for some reason. And then she's also very preoccupied with her daughter Mary's hair, because when we first see her with her daughter Mary, her daughter, first of all, has like the most awfully colored blonde hair, but she's wearing it sort of like slicked back with like a side part and some baby hair showing, and her mother doesn't like that. And she's telling her like, oh, I'm gonna go get you some nice shampoo and we can do your hair. Which I thought was also funny because the wigs Neve is wearing, which she also keeps in like this very nice like wig closet, are kind of raggedy. They have hard edges, and I would think for a woman who's so preoccupied with not seeming black and who has money would have a better wig game, but whatever. There's also a clue that maybe her past is coming back to haunt her, because at one point she gets a package in the mail, and it's like a little toy race car. Again, I think the fact that I knew that she had a past, that little sort of clue was kind of like pointless to me. We also get a lot of her like scratching her scalp under her wig. There's even a point where she almost crashes her car because her scalp is itching so bad and her trying to scratch it. And then once the jig is up and her husband knows that she has these like black children that she never mentioned, she finally takes off the wig and lets her real hair be exposed. Because prior to that, her husband even comments like, you never let me see your hair. It's always either wrapped up or under a wig. And you know, I like your hair. I liked it how it was when I met you. And when we finally do see her hair, it almost looks like she has like tension alopecia, which if that was a choice, I think it's interesting because it kind of shows that maybe she hates who she is so much that she's like literally trying to pull her hair out. But I thought that was interesting. When Neve is at work and she sees this new janitor, the black man, who ends up being her son, and she sees her son Sebastian talking to him, she reacts like very negatively. And then when she believes that the janitor supplied her son with a cigarette, she tries to get him fired, even though she doesn't know for a fact it was him. So very aggressively against this person. And I think it's kind of blurry as to whether or not she knew that was her son. I would imagine she didn't recognize Carl as her son, because if she did, she probably would have reacted differently, like her safety was at risk. But again, I thought it was interesting. Then there's a point when Sebastian, her son, comes home late and he's kind of being disrespectful. And Neve like rips off her chancla and beats him with it. I thought that was funny. Then there's a moment where her daughter Myrie we find out in part 2 that in part 1, the person who her daughter Myrie was hanging out with was actually Dion. And so in part 1, Myrie comes home with her hair braided in cornrows, and then we ultimately find out it was Myrie who did it. But Neve is at home with her husband and their 2 friends who are white, and when Myrie shows up with this hair, they're like, gee, that looks really swell. And then the other guy is like, yeah, it looks really ethnic. And it just, like, it just made me think that Neve / Cheryl has run away from her previous life to live this life, but then as a spectator, it seems like this life you're living isn't that great. Like, yeah, you get to drive a Range Rover and live in a nice house, but it's also a very restrictive environment. Like, you have to pretend to be something you're not. You actually have to denounce who you are as a person, which, again, it's quite interesting that I never get the sense that she doesn't mind her new life, but it's also not this grand life. I don't know. There's a lot to think about that's not explicitly handed to us, but it's interesting. There is a bully bothering Sebastian, which I thought was funny because the bully is kind of making fun of him perhaps for being like biracial, but that bully looks like he could be brothers with Sebastian, because even though this kid looks white, Sebastian is extremely fair-skinned, and then the bully kind of has like textured hair that's cut in a style that, you know, if you looked at both of them really quickly, you would think they're related. So that's interesting. At one point, Sebastian tells Carl, before he realizes who Carl is, that his mom thinks she's white and anything black is off limits. So that's very telling. And then there's a point where Carl is trying to make a man out of Sebastian. I'm also a little confused, like, why. I understand why Carl and Dion wanted to sort of get involved in this family's life to get to their mother, but then it seems like particularly Carl was very interested in getting to know Sebastian, and at a point they go sit on a rooftop and smoke weed, and there is some tension because Carl's telling Sebastian at the top of this high-rise building, like, go look over the edge and see if you're scared. And he forces him to do it. And Sebastian is so scared that he pees on himself. And at that point, Carl says, you passed the test. So, again, not quite sure what Carl and Dion's intentions are. Like, there's a lot of trauma related to their mother abandoning them. And I can imagine them wanting to be part of a family, if not her specifically. So, again, very interesting. But the final sort of act of the film where Dion and Carl are broken into the house, there was a lot of tension because we see them get very comfortable. They run a bath, they turn on the TV loudly, they flood the kitchen sink, which floods like the entire kitchen and dining room area. And it's clear that Carl wants to be very aggressive. And those actors were doing a very good job of seeming unhinged. So it was very tense, and even up to the point where we see the barbell fall on the husband's chest. I was expecting a lot more violence to occur, but that final scene when Neve / Cheryl runs off with the delivery guy, abandoning all 4 of her children, that was very unexpected. It feels bold, it feels provocative. I'm impressed this is a directorial debut. I liked how the film looked. I liked the acting from everyone. So yeah, I would recommend this. I would watch it with people to have a discussion. I would give the Strays 3 out of 5 stars. Hit the thanks button. Listen to our podcast. Bye.